Hello and welcome to episode 399 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan, as always, joined by Evan Silva. And today we have a very, very special guest. You may know him from his time here at ETR. You may know him from his work at Pro Football Focus. You should know him because he understands usage is by far the most important thing in fantasy, and especially in DFS. It is PFF's Dwain McFarland. Dwain, how's it going, buddy?
Hey, man. Glad to be here. Was just chatting with Evan before the show, just living it up, 100 plus degrees every day down here in Texas. So, I'm getting out here, touching some dirt. Evan, I actually do my own yard. So I don't just say I do it. I actually do it.
Yeah, hang on. I just wanted to clear something up here. I said that I don't mow my own lawn because I'm contributing to my little buddy's business. All right. He's a 13-year-old kid. He's trying to start his own business. He's mowing the lawn. He's been helping with the weeds as well. I did not say I don't do my own yard work. And Adam put that out there into the Twitter sphere. I said specifically, I don't mow my own lawn because I contribute to this little kid's business. Okay. I believe in entrepreneurship. Do you not, Adam?
Oh, I very much believe in entrepreneurship. Okay. Evan is, I like that, teach the kids young to run a business. I love it.
Yep.
Good for Screw these kids. They're going to all be coming for our jobs.
All right. On today's show, we are going to dive deep at the running back position. I know we hit the wide receivers position pretty hard last week with Matt Harmon. I think getting into running back with Dwain will be very, very useful. Before we get into it, I have to remind everyone this show is indeed brought to you by our friends at Underdog Fantasy. No doubt the smoothest, highest stakes, best user experience for anyone trying to play best ball. And honestly, if you're behind in your drafts, just grinding some best ball drafts will get you up to speed very quickly on where the market's at and what you think of players. Use promo code ETR when you sign up for $100 matching deposit bonus. And if you have our Draft Kit Pro, which you should, you get a $10 automatically in your Underdog account. Speaking of our Draft Kit, we are just grinding our cocks off to make the 2022 fantasy rankings for all formats the best they can be. We have every member of our team looking over every decimal point in the projections and trying to figure out range of outcomes for all these players. Really is a massive undertaking to find all of our rankings for every format in the Draft Kit. All right, Dwain, I almost don't want to include this one, but everybody seems to have an opinion on this. And I put out a tweet, and I was kind of mocking, and I get why some people were angry, but I said, the people who don't want to take Christian McCaffrey number one overall are the people that have the intercourse with 4 condoms on. And all the people who you think they can predict injuries got very, very angry with me. I'm in the camp that it is very, very hard to predict injuries, especially at running back where these guys are getting hurt constantly. And yeah, I think Jonathan Taylor is more likely to stay healthy than Christian McCaffrey this season, but not by a ton. And I think Christian McCaffrey is a way better fantasy bet than Jonathan Taylor when both are healthy. And maybe that's a hot take. Maybe it's not. I'm curious where you come down, Dwain. Let's ignore health for a second. What do you think about the CMC versus JT debate at 1.1?
Yeah, I don't think it's a hot take at all. If they're both healthy, CMC is going to outscore JT. It's just, I don't think there's really a debate. You got a player that's just so involved in the passing game, with CMC. So if you just look at his games last year where he played at least 50%, of the snaps, he was still ungodly, right? He was the RB1, the RB3, the RB4, the RB3. Targets per route run, 34%, 2.91 yards per route run. I know they're small samples, but we can go back to full year sample sizes after that, if everybody wants to. So it's just his usage in the passing game is just, it's really unheard of. It's amazing. It's above what we get from Kamara, any of these other backs. And with JT, as much as we love him, he's not a flawless RB1 overall. He's just, and I get it, CMC's got the injury history, but with JT, we know Nyheim Hines is involved. They've been talking him up. He's got a very special skill set because he can create mismatches versus linebacker safeties. You get in a 2-minute offense situation, you're going to see more of Hines. And the big thing for the Colts last year, they led all of the time. So, they led 40% of the time. They led by 4 or more points. So that is one of the highest in the NFL. That's 13% above the NFL average. And so that alone just allowed them to keep JT on the field. And so as much as we may love him, if they regress more to the mean and they're in more shootouts or they're in more close games, that naturally is going to lend itself to seeing more Nyheim Hines.
And touchdowns. Jonathan Taylor had 26 carries from inside the 5-yard line last year. That was 10 more than anybody else in the entire league. I feel like that has to regress on some level as well, which speaks to what you were talking about them having a lead. And that's not to say I'm down on JT. JT is an awesome pick. I just think, to me, it's clearly CMC. All right. Let's move to some kind of intra-team battles. Let's start with Aaron Jones versus A.J. Dillon. I think that's a really interesting one to start off on, because this is, for the second year in a row, I really like both of them. So where are you at on the Green Bay situation right now, Dwayne?
Well, number one, I just think looking at the Green Bay offense, like this is probably the two best players they have on the offense. So that's a starting point. And I know it's running back, right? So your EPA, all those things are going to be lower. But when I look at these two, they're just very different. It's almost back to Kamara, Mark Ingram, whenever Kamara first got right to New Orleans. And so last year when both guys were healthy, so this excludes all the games where, there were a couple games in there where they weren't both playing together. So just looking at the ones where they were together, Jones played 60% of the snaps, 45% of the attempts, 78% of the long down and distance work, and basically passing downs. And then the 2-minute offense, 70% of the time it was Jones. But Dillon did increase his short down and distance and work inside the 5 over the stretch of the season. So I think it's probably going to be something similar where you're going to see Jones on the field 55-60% of the time. You'll see Dillon out there the rest of the time. But in game scripts where the Packers are up, we could see more Dillon. And game scripts where the Packers are down, we could see, more Jones. And so I think it's something where, to your point, like, I think we can like both of them at ADP. The thing with Dillon you're getting is really, I would grade him as a high-end RB3. And if for some reason Jones goes down, like, you've got a top 6 running back. So, sure. I mean, you're getting flex value right out of the gate, but it could be a league winner if something does happen to Aaron Jones.
A.J. Dillon right now is just a guy that every time I look at my rankings, I kind of want to move him up because I want him on my teams this year. Because I think that, as you mentioned, the Packers, they're going to be up a lot, I think. I mean, their defense is freaking stacked right now. They're getting a bunch of some guys back on the offensive line. They've got like ascending young players on the offensive line. They've got Aaron Rodgers, who I know his receiver core is not pretty, but he's a quarterback that can elevate teammates. And look at this freaking division. I mean, the Bears are going to be awful. The Lions are kind of fun, like I'm betting they're over at 6.5, but I'd be surprised if they won more than 8. And then the Vikings are kind of like in a rebuild. I think that they're going to score a lot of points, but they're going to give a lot of points up too. The Packers, like, they're in position to control football games, and A.J. Dillon not only can capitalize on that, but he showed that he could play as a receiver last year too. I mean, he had 34 receptions. So yeah, I want him on my teams this year.
The last point you made, Evan, is the one for me on A.J. Dillon. If something happens to Aaron Jones, A.J. Dillon's ability to play in the pass game last year, like, I was shocked. Like, I didn't think that he had that in him to go out and catch 4 or 5 balls in a game. I thought he was more Derrick Henry-ish, but man, I thought he looked pretty smooth in the pass game. So yeah, I'm excited about both of them too, but they're getting expensive, man. I mean, A.J. Dillon is like round 6 now, or round 5 at times. So yeah, it's getting expensive. All right. Let's go to another one that I think people are having a hard time with: Javonte Williams versus Melvin Gordon. The ADP gap here is massive. And we debated this with Leone maybe about a month ago. You guys can go back and listen to the case for Javonte. I kind of think that Melvin Gordon at his cost is also a pretty good pick. Dwayne, where are you coming down on the Denver backfield?
I like both players at their ADP. I have to draft Melvin Gordon because I draft so much Javonte. So basically, like, if something happens, I at least need to be covered, with Melvin Gordon. So look, the thing is with Javonte, like, you're getting him in the early 3rd round. Sometimes in sharper drafts, he's creeping into the end of the 2nd round. Over on FFPC, I believe is already like a mid-2nd. So it's a high, it's a high pick to be spending on him. But the thing I like about him, and I know this is a different staff this year, but a big thing that I took away last year, a lot of times with these rookie backs, when we see them working their way in, it'll be they're in a limited role because they only trust them like on early downs. And that wasn't the case with Javonte. So they actually worked him in short down and distance inside the 5. They used him in the 2-minute offense. They used him in long down and distance where you've got to pick up the blitz, all those sort of things. And he came through and really outplayed Melvin Gordon slightly in all those areas. Melvin Gordon was still a really good back last year, But when I just look at Javonte, like in the missed tackles forced per attempt, 31%. That's plus 14% versus the NFL average. Yards after contact, 3.42. That's plus 0.49 yards above the NFL average over the last 3 years. And then his explosive rush rate. So these are your carries of 10 plus yards or more, 12%, which is 1.5 percentage points above the NFL average. So when you look at him, like he compares to like Nick Chubb and Jonathan Taylor, like these numbers are off the freaking chart. So it's definitely, you're swinging for the upside with Javonte in the third round. But I think with Russ Wilson as your quarterback, if he does take over 65% of this backfield, like he's going to be a league winner. Like he's going to be somebody we should have been taking in the top 6 picks. I think the nice thing with him is even if we don't get there, I would still project him to get the ball more than Melvin Gordon, right? Slightly more than what we saw last year, which was basically a 50-50 split. So it's not going to be ideal if you're taking him in the early third, but it's not going to kill you, right? You could still be getting like an RB15, RB16. He was RB17 last year in PPR format. So don't get me wrong, you look at points per game, it's not as pretty, right? as the overall score. So not trying to like pull magic with that. But yeah, I love both. Gordon obviously going much later, 9th, 10th round in most drafts. So he's very affordable. And if something does happen to Javonte Williams, he could also provide, I know we're not trying to overuse this word, but in that offense, it could be league winning upside.
Evan, in your top 150, you're slightly behind market on Javonte and pretty significantly above market on Melvin. I think people need to understand formats, right? Like on places like Underdog or these big FFPC tournaments, like you can swing for the fence harder because all the money is up top. All the money is in first. And so if Javonte hits in the third round, you can win $1 million. If you swing for the fences in round 3 of your 10-team home league, it's not as appetizing. Follow what I'm saying. And Evan's rankings are obviously geared more towards people playing in 10 and 12 team home leagues. But I don't know, Evan, how do you feel about where you're at right now on the Denver backfield?
Yeah, I mean, I have all these guys like literally right next to each other, both obviously in the tiers, but also in the top 150. Leonard Fournette, James Conner, Saquon Barkley, Javonte Williams. Now, I've taken Javonte Williams in the middle of the second round in drafts where there's like 15 to 18 guys that I would love in the middle of the second round. If all those guys go, like I'm looking at like Javonte Williams just based on upside, and he's got a solid floor. And you have to understand the complexion of the offense, the ceiling on the offense has just gotten so much higher because of Russell Wilson's addition, because they're not run by like the oldest coaching staff in league history anymore. Losing Mike Munchak might hurt up front a little bit, but I mean, they've still got, pretty much the same players up front that they had previously. And I think that they're definitely going to be more progressive and more aggressive on offense under Nathaniel Hackett, who sounds like he's going to be leaving the offensive approach really up to Russ. And so I think that bodes well for every member of the offense.
Let's go to the Detroit situation. DeAndre Swift is called steam, man. When I first started doing a couple of drafts, you get DeAndre Swift in like round 3, sometimes round 4. I mean, now I've seen DeAndre Swift go round 1, round 2 turn, and very early round 2. And I think I still like him there because like the archetype of the way DeAndre Swift scores points is the way I want my fantasy players to score points. Austin Ekeler, Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey type. I think DeAndre Swift has that in him, but Jamaal Williams is certainly still there and had a pretty significant role last year when he was healthy. Dwayne, what do you think about the split between DeAndre Swift and Jamaal Williams?
Yeah, I mean, first, like Swift hits the things that, you were just talking about. Explosive rush rate, 14%. That's 2.5 percentage points above the NFL average. So we've got an explosive playmaker, and then he's always out there on passing downs. He was out there for 65% of the routes, which is absolutely elite. Like that's up there, not quite to like CMC level, but that's up there towards Alvin Kamara. That's actually better than some of Alvin Kamara's seasons. So like he has the two things we want, especially like in those PPR formats. Swift does have some flaws though. Like he's not like this flawless prospect. His PFF rushing grade and receiving grade, which I've been doing a lot more research now around and, looking at it for, fantasy purposes, obviously working for PFF, like that's been a big thing for me. And it's just, it hasn't been good. Like he's been below the NFL average in both of those marks. And, when you look at Jamaal Williams, like is he a player that's just he's the opposite of what we just talked about, like this hyper explosive player, right? That's, going to create all these big plays, but he's a dependable player. And he can play on all downs. We've seen him do it with the Packers, with Aaron Rodgers. We even saw him do it some last year. And the one thing I'll say is, Evan, you mentioned earlier, like the Lions arrow could be pointed up, right? For now, let's just call them fun. But the arrow could be pointed up. The offensive line, has a lot of draft capital in it. There's a lot of room here. But if you just look last year in the games where both of these players played together and they weren't trailing. Now, they trailed all the damn time last year. So it's just kind of hard. So, but if you look at the games, if the plays where they were within 3 points or leading by 4 or more, 55% of the snaps to Swift and 41% to Williams. So a lot closer than what probably a lot of people that are taking him at the beginning of the second round think, where you're looking for somebody that's probably more like 65 to 70%. But he does bail you out, with the receiving ability, because even when you're talking about leading or in close games, it was definitely still Swift that was out there for the passing downs. He just shared more of the rushing workload with Williams in those scenarios.
Yeah. Evan, I'm curious what you think of the DeAndre Swift steam. I know we both like him a lot. You have him up to 11th overall, so maybe you're actually contributing to some of this steam that DeAndre Swift is getting in drafts.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it. I moved him ahead of Derrick Henry. So, that's a lot. Moved him ahead of the big dog. Hey, I'm on the clock right now in FFPC main event, slow draft. Nico Collins, David Bell, or Kendrick Bourne. No Kendrick Bourne. We're not drafting him.
Yeah, you guys know how I feel about Nico.
Yeah, I'm going Nico. All right, cool.
Yeah. Okay.
Hey, one thing I will say on this one, Jamaal Williams is one of my favorite backs to take late. I love taking him, rounds 14, 15, just because if something does happen with Swift, whether it is he's not performing well, whether it's injury, whatever the case may be, people forget Williams is capable. He'll probably be a borderline RB1 just on the volume that, he could get. Yeah, down the stretch last year, he did share a little bit more, but remember, he was dealing with some different injuries in those weeks when we were without Swift. So, still the number 16 RB in cap hit, for the NFL this season, number 11 player on the Lions. So I think he's somebody that could definitely give you like a James Conner potentially type, upside, if something does happen with Swift.
By the way, Dwayne, you mentioned the PFF stats that you're looking at now that you have access behind the curtain at PFF. I'm curious what you think are predictive stats at the running back position, like things that we should be looking at. Because I think for wide receiver, yards per route run, I think has been very effective and predictive. At running back, what do you think we should be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, you want to start with the things that you think the running back has the most control over, and you're trying to separate it from, just the offensive line and all those things. So I've been working a lot, with, even the PFF grades and starting to look at those and dig into them more. But like the missed tackles forced per attempt, a big part of that, right, is the running back. The yards after contact, a big part of that really is the running back. And then if you look at the explosive rush rate, yes, offensive line does play a role, but you will see, the players that are consistent year over year. Now it does tail off, right? Once they hit like year 4, year 5, they're going to start to drop. But those are typically the 3 things. And then I'll pair those with the PFF rushing grade and try to just get a handle on like, what do we think the talent profile of the player is? And then I start trying to calculate in, okay, what's the competition for touches in the backfield and what does the quality of the offense look like? And those 3 things really come together to create the profile.
Yeah. And to me, that stuff is important for season long and even more important for Dynasty. Once we get into DFS season, the usage is going to be absolutely everything in a 1-game sample. How good a running back is, I don't think matters nearly as much as that. But anyways, I digress. Let's talk about the Tampa situation. So we had this story break yesterday that Leonard Fournette didn't show up for OTAs, showed up for mandatory mini camp, and the coaches were pissed off because he showed up at 260 pounds. Now, Evan and I have talked about this before, and that report also said that the coaches are high on Rachaad White. Part of Leonard Fournette's appeal last year was his role was outrageous. I mean, playing every snap, including the pass snaps and the goal line snaps, on a team with a quarterback who throws so much to the running back, and on a team which has so many red zone opportunities. I mean, it was outrageous. If Leonard Fournette starts to lose some of that role, though, he's 27, allegedly out of shape, which I don't think will be a big concern by the end of August, but allegedly out of shape, et cetera, et cetera. There's room for poking holes in Leonard Fournette's profile. So what do you think about what's going on with Rachaad White, Leonard Fournette? I don't know if you think Gio's in the mix or anything else with Tampa.
Yeah, Fournette, like this definitely isn't good news. I'm trying to not overreact right now to this, just because the role and the offense that he plays in, and Brady trusts him. Like I've been very high on Fournette, but this is definitely concerning. The thing I'll say about, Rachaad White, he had a 16% target share in his senior year, at Arizona State. That was really the best in this class. So we know that it's something he can come out and do. I think the question is, like, will Brady trust him, right? Because you've got it. We've seen all of these backs over the years that, if Brady doesn't trust you, and a lot of the time it does come back to rookies, like, you're not going to be on the field, and he does trust Fournette. So I think I'm still leaning.
Is he going to get pissed off at Leonard Fournette though for getting all fat?
He could. You're right. Like, he could. The thing with Fournette that's interesting, like when I was doing my research on him, you think of Fournette just really more as like this swing pass kind of check down guy. But what was interesting, of all the running backs that have hit 20% targets per route run in 5 straight seasons to start their career, Leonard Fournette is one of them. Like, listen to these names: Alvin Kamara, Austin Ekeler, Damian Williams, DeMarco Murray, Gio Bernard, Jalen Richard, James White, Kareem Hunt, Naheem Hines, and Theo Riddick. Like, Fournette, like, is on this list with all of these like receiving backs. Like, I had no clue, like, he had that, much of a role in Jacksonville whenever they gave him the opportunity. So, I think it's a situation that we have to monitor, honestly. Like, if his ADP started to push down just because of, the fat stories, I guess maybe they're not a story, like the truth around, his size. I'd probably just be buying the dip, to be honest, for now. And then if his ADP crept back up, then I would probably just let off.
Yeah.
I was looking at it last night and I was just like, should I move him? And I just moved up Rachaad White, and I left Fournette right where he's at. I have him like 24, 23, somewhere in that range overall.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, his ADP is undoubtedly going to sink. I talked about this on Monday on the Market Monday pod. Like, this story went viral and his ADP is undoubtedly going to sink. And I kind of agree on buying the dip, but I like having Rachaad White shares as well, for sure.
I think Rachaad White's an absolute priority, obviously. Like, once you get to round, for home leagues, he'll probably go like around 12 or 13. If you're playing in more competitive leagues, it's going to be rounds 10 and 11 or like where Rachaad White's going to be. That's pretty much where he's at now.
Yeah. I want to talk about the Chargers. I think everybody assumes it's an absolute slam dunk on Austin Ekeler, and it's similar to the way I talked about before, how these guys score points like Austin Ekeler is just so valuable. I'm more interested in what you think of the other spot in the backfield. It's kind of been a wasteland, but people seem to be excited about Isaiah Spiller. What do you think about what he can do, and does he affect Austin Ekeler at all?
Yeah, number one, I don't think he affects Ekeler. Ekeler last year hit a career high 53% of the team rushing attempts, and that's probably around where they'll keep him. He's even come out and said, hey, we want to keep me fresh. But he was out there for 59%, in route participation. So when the Chargers were dropping back to pass, he'll probably be around 60% again, but they definitely want someone else to work in. And so with Spiller, there are several things that I love about him. The big negative really is that he ran the 4.6 340, 114-inch, broad jump, the 33-inch vert, like those things all, really sent his draft capital spiraling downward, right? He was supposed to be a second round pick, ended up going in the 4th round. But besides all that, like, I'm positive on him. He'll only be 21. That's the youngest back in this rookie class. Above average of missed tackles forced for college players at 24%, and explosive rush rate 16%. He had 24% of A&M's offense as a freshman, averaged 103 yards total per game. Only Breece Hall and Sincere McCormick hit those marks in this class. So we're talking about a guy that's young. We're talking about a guy that broke out early in college, and he ran about 40. It freaking happens. So what? He's not an explosive player. He has an every down profile. So I think the other factor is when we look at Larry Roundtree and Joshua Kelly, I mean, they suck. Yards after contact, way below the NFL average. 3% explosive rush rate for Larry Roundtree. I mean, that's minus 7.5 percentage points below the NFL average. And Kelly's 4.5 percentage points below. Missed tackles forced, they're both below the NFL average. So I don't see any way that Isaiah Spiller does not end up as the RB2. And if he's not, I think they'll sign someone, because I don't think Roundtree or Kelly are going to be the answer. I think Spiller's going underdrafted. Like, I think he should go ahead of Rachaad White because I think he can give you spike week value if you're playing best ball, because he could handle 30-40% of the work in a really good offense. And if something does happen to Ekeler, like, again, we have another back that could end up being an RB1 easily, despite the issues that we saw at the combine.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I definitely like taking shots on him as well. I want to ask about the Cincinnati situation. Evan is below market on Joe Mixon. He has him 19th overall. And this all stems, and Evan and I have talked about it. I mean, they have no interest in using Joe Mixon in the pass game, like none, and that's what all this stems from. How high can you take Joe Mixon knowing this is how the Bengals staff feels about him, Dwayne?
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, you could argue that Joe Mixon is basically an arbitrage Jonathan Taylor. They have the same role. They both depend on touchdowns for a big portion of their scoring. Jonathan Taylor is the better talent, right? He's a better player, but Mixon's good. But to your point, yeah, they don't use him in the passing game. Only 17% of the long down and distance work last year, and only 42% of the 2-minute offense. And guess what? Samaje Perine sucks, and they still won't put Joe Mixon out there. Joe Mixon's receiving grades over on PFF are better than Perine's. Targets per route run are pretty similar. Neither one of them are a plus from that standpoint. They profile more like an RB3 than an RB1 or an RB2. So yeah, it's tough to buy into. With Mixon, it's hard to see like this super high ceiling case. And so I'm passing him a lot, like at that turn where other people are taking him. Just because, like, honestly, I'd rather draft Saquon Barkley. I'd rather draft a player that I think can be out there 80% of the time, catch 70 balls. Probably not going to score as many touchdowns as Mixon. He's not in near as good of an offense, but I just feel like, a younger player with more upside overall with Barkley. And so, I mean, I'm often just passing Mixon just to take Barkley, even if it means I'm taking Barkley like 5 picks ahead of ADP.
Yeah. Yeah, that happens a lot. Evan, any further thoughts on being below market on Mixon? What do you think about Dwayne's Saquon take? Who do you like straight up between Saquon and Mixon?
I have Mixon like 2 spots ahead in terms of positional rankings. So actually, no, 4 spots ahead. I don't know if Saquon Barkley is good anymore. That's my thing. I don't. What do your metrics look like for Saquon Barkley?
Yeah, so on Barkley, it is tough because we, had the knee injury that he was coming off of, and he was just starting to kind of get back going. And then he had the freak accident, where he steps on Jordan Lewis's foot like after the whistle. And so that pretty much made last year tough to look at, and then obviously the year before we had such a small sample size. So, but I think to your point, that's the risk. So like in my tier article, my call out on Barkley is like, look, you're going to get the utilization. What I can't tell you for sure is whether his explosiveness is going to return. I tend to lean into like the analysis from people like Edwin Porras out on the marketplace. And they seem to think that, Barkley will bounce back because he is young enough, but it's a legit point, Evan. Like, I think that's the big question, with Barkley is, does the explosiveness return?
Yeah. One thing I noted looking at some stuff too is that I noticed that he hasn't been that great as a receiver even. When you think of Saquon Barkley, you think that he's like an excellent receiver, and he really hasn't been that in recent years. When I watch him play, like he came out of Penn State, and I've said this a million times, I know, but when he came out of Penn State, he was a boomer bust runner, but when he could get like an avenue, he could put his foot in the ground and explode and rip off a 60-yard run, right? But it seems to me, and I think he still has lateral agility, but he's lost that ability to like get vertical, at a really high rate. So I don't know. Can he get that back? That's the big question. And for me, like betting on rebounds with guys, like it's real hit or miss, and usually it doesn't go the way that you want.
Yeah. To me, the best argument for Saquon is that his profile, the way that he's used, the way that his usage will be, is that of a like number 1 overall running back, whereas the profile of Joe Mixon is not that. I mean, to me, that's the best argument for Saquon. So yeah.
And I like Barkley's, underlying receiving data. Okay. Like his targets per route run are still solid. Let's throw out the year where he only played the 2 games in 2020, but 24% targets per route run and 18% and a 22%. So over the, last 10 years of fantasy, an RB1, on targets per route run is right at 20%. So he's above that. But I think the big question is the explosiveness. I'm betting on the age. Like typically if it's a bounce back candidate and we're talking about, 27, 28 years old, I'm a lot more leery. It's crazy to me that Saquon's only 1 year older than Najee Harris. It's nuts.
Yeah. Let's go to an interesting one is the Dallas Cowboys. everybody wants to be high on Pollard. I don't think we have to argue like who's better between Pollard and Zeke. Dwayne, I assume you agree that if you were in charge of the Cowboys, you'd be playing Pollard over Zeke. I'm just not sure that matters too much. The question is, how will they be used by the Cowboys this year? And Zeke is much cheaper this year than he's ever been in the history of his career. What do you think about the Zeke versus Pollard split this year?
Dwayne,
yeah,
a Cowboys fan.
I got my Jerry makes me drink shirt.
Jerry
on.
makes me
That's
drink.
amazing.
So
That's amazing.
Yeah. Man, yes. Obviously, when you're watching the games and you see how explosive Tony Pollard is and how unexplosive Ezekiel Elliott is at this point in their careers, like the thing that would make sense is to just give Pollard more touches. I don't know if they're going to. And the problem with Pollard, it's kind of like what you talked about with Dylan. The ADP is just pushing up so much. Whereas with Dylan, it's like, I know he's probably a top 2 talent on the offense, like, cause I'm just not nuts about any of those receivers. Whereas with Pollard, we still got CeeDee Lamb to deal with, Dalton Schultz is overrated, but that's a separate topic, but still fine. And so I don't know, like with Pollard, I think it's going to take an injury to Zeke to really pay off, the ADP. But if Zeke does get hurt, like, obviously, like Pollard, huge upside, and a great offense. So that's there. And with Zeke, to your point, Adam, it's just all priced in at this point. Like if the Cowboys are going to remain, stubborn, and we think that they can still be a quality offense, which I think there's some questions around them, this year, but we would still call them a quality offense with a quality quarterback, which is a huge portion, of being a quality offense. I think where Zeke can pay off, in a 4th round ADP is if he comes through in a big way in touchdowns, right? If he gave you 12 to 14 touchdowns, I guess, the other thing is we could see the backs more involved in the passing game, with Amari Cooper out of the picture and Gallup likely not back in the fold until late October or early November.
Well, that's the thing, Dwayne, is like, where is the explosiveness on offense going to come from if they don't involve Tony Pollard more? Amari Cooper is gone. Michael Gallup probably out till October, right? You got CeeDee Lamb. We probably all agree that he's primed for a big year, but I mean he's a slot receiver. And we're digging into James Washington stuff right now. So people are trying to talk up Jalen Tolbert, which we'll see. But I mean, to me, I'm staying optimistic on Tony Pollard because I think that at some point the coaches are going to have to go in and be like, we need his explosiveness on the field. And they're going to have to go to ownership and, because it seems to me like ownership is really the driving force behind their stubbornness, their stubborn commitment to Ezekiel Elliott.
Yeah. That's what it seems locally too. Sorry.
And that's why you've been drinking so much.
Yeah. I just add that I don't think the Cowboys are done at wide receiver. Not that they get anyone great, but I don't think it's out of the question for them to get Julio or Will Fuller or who knows, someone like that. Not that would help a ton, but yeah.
Let me ask you guys. So are you in on Pollard at ADP? Like I have Pollard shares. I would say I'm probably slightly underweight right now. I see it probably evening out where I'll at least be even to the market because I know the upside's there. I just struggle to get overweight. I agree with everything you're saying, Evan, and it totally makes sense. It's just like, will it come to fruition?
Right. I know. And I don't even think it'll happen I don't think it'll happen in September. I mean, I think that the Cowboys are going to at very least give Zeke September to prove himself, and see if he can bounce back. I mean, the PCL injury was a legit deal last year. Yeah. I mean, we have to acknowledge that his metrics were so bad last year, though, and just Tony Pollard's were so much better in terms of broken tackle rate and everything else.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, they put the narrative out there that the reason Zeke underperformed last year was because of the PCL. So very, very clearly they want to put that out there. So they're like, oh, yeah, we got to give him a chance to start the year for sure. All right. Let's go to Patriots running backs. Evan and I have been talking a ton about Rhamondre Stevenson for, I don't know, seems like 2 months now. We've been talking about being high on Rhamondre Stevenson. Of course, the concern is that he doesn't actually have a shot at the James White role. That's going to go to, I don't know, people keep tweeting at me about Ty Montgomery and other stuff like that. That would actually surprise me. I'm curious what you think about how the Patriots are going to play. And by the way, there was a report from Mike Reese over the weekend that James White was at a charity thing and is still limping off of the hip surgery, which obviously is not a good sign. We're at July 19th right now. We're projecting James White to be on the PUP list to start the season, as I'm sure most people are now. But go ahead on the Patriots running backs, Dwayne.
Yeah. So it was probably Ian Hartitz Nobody talks about Ty Montgomery more than Ian. It's like I just have to mute him. I'm like, what are we talking about, Ian? Come on. But yeah, with Rhamondre Stevenson, he definitely flashed as a rookie. He had the 15% explosive rush rate. So again, those are carries of 10 plus yards or more. And in the receiving game, he had a 22% targets per route run. And so the targets per route run is something I really like to use for players where we know they just had a backfield that was divided up, right? If we know, it's something where, a player played the whole season, you're just going to use target shares. But I think the targets per route run where it really comes in handy is when you're trying to figure out, hey, if this player did get a larger role, could we see upside? And that number would indicate that. My biggest problem with Stevenson, it's just the classic thing, right? We're dealing with the Patriots backfield. They spent a very similar pick to what they used on Stevenson last year with Pierre Strong in the 4th round this year. We also know that we've heard they're toying around with these Kyle Shanahan concepts. Pierre Strong Jr. will probably be their best wide zone runner. He was the best wide zone runner in college football coming out this past year, along with Breece Hall. So I think that's my bigger concern than anything like Ty Montgomery. Honestly, James White, they didn't sign to a lot of money. Like, I won't be surprised if they cut James White.
Agreed.
So I think the bigger challenge is Pierre Strong Jr., who profiles also as a potentially good receiving back and what they do with the offense. So my biggest issue, I like Stevenson. I'm trying to get exposure to him as much as I can, in drafts. The problem is he's just slightly ahead of where I want to take him. And I prefer Isaiah Spiller. I prefer, Rachaad White. I think they have cleaner paths to the big upside role. And I think, honestly, Spiller probably has just as much of a path to a similar role as Stevenson. But if Ekeler goes down, I think you get everything. I think with Rhamondre Stevenson, you need Damian Harris to go down. Then you probably need Pierre Strong Jr. to go down. And then you need whoever's playing special teams to go down. And then whoever they sign next off the waiver wire, you need that player to go down. Just because the Patriots have just been so bullish about sticking with these committees, for such a long time. A lot of times I will dismiss, some of these coaching patterns. But with the Patriots, it's a tough one, to get past.
Well, speaking of coaching patterns, people are all in my mentions telling me that Patriots never play a rookie. And so Pierre Strong is a non-factor because Bill Belichick's never going to play a rookie running back anyways. And I know Rhamondre played a lot last year, which I thought was a credit to his talent, but he was a healthy scratch for the first 5 games of the season, if I remember correctly. So yeah, we've maybe Evan and I have dismissed Pierre Strong too sharply here, but it would still surprise me if he beat out Rhamondre.
Well, I think that it's really interesting, some of the nuggets that Dwayne dropped about Pierre Strong. And I thought that he was a really interesting dude coming out of it's South Dakota State, I believe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah, the Jackrabbits.
The Jackrabbits, yep.
But he is a 4th round or a day 3 FCS player. So I don't know. He had such a great athletic profile though, and you mentioned about the wide zone stuff. He's interesting. He's going to be a really interesting player to monitor, I think, in the preseason.
All right. Let's stay in the AFC East. Bills running backs. I've been trying to take James Cook based on the Bills' clear intention to add a pass catching complement to Devin Singletary. They had the J.D. McKissic deal. They couldn't get it done. He backs out. Then they spend a very high draft pick on James Cook, who I'm not ruling out from being able to handle some base work, but obviously a lot of this projection is James Cook being able to handle the pass work on one of the most pass-happy teams in the league. Of course, Josh Allen doesn't throw at the running back spot as much, but still, I still like James Cook. What do you think about what's going on with Buffalo, Dwayne?
Yeah, and the Josh Allen thing, not throwing to running backs, honestly doesn't bother me as much. Cam Newton didn't throw to running backs either until he had Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah.
So, there's certain profiles for these backs, specifically the ones that work at a plus ADOT. Most backs in the NFL, if you look at them, you guys know, the ADOT will be minus 0.5 yards, minus 1 yards. James Cook is a plus ADOT player. He is more like a Kamara. He's more like an Aaron Jones. I'm not saying he's those guys. I'm not saying he's CMC, but I think you hit the nail on the head, Adam. What if the Buffalo Bills were so adamant about adding, one of these mismatched players out of the backfield because they really want to press the boundaries of how often do you want to drop back to pass in the NFL? And maybe that number is now 80%. I don't know, but we're talking about one of the best offenses in the league with one of the best quarterbacks, and they have no clue who their number 2 target is behind Stephon Diggs right now. Right. I know it's a whole separate conversation. We don't have to get into it with Gabriel Davis. And Gabriel Davis is like a 2-hour pod, by itself, and then you have Dawson Knox, who basically was carried along by the offense, but his targets per route run, his yards per route run, his PFF receiving, none of those things were special. So technically speaking, like we could have like a 25 to 30% target share guy and Stephon Diggs, and the running back could be the number 2 target, like at a 17, 18%, or we could just have it spread around across a bunch of players, and James Cook still gets to like 14 to 15% of the targets. I just worry less about him because he's not a check down type back. Those are the backs that quarterbacks don't want to throw to. If you're Lamar Jackson and you look over and see Gus Edwards in the flat, or you can just take it for 30, like you're just going to run. You're better than Gus Edwards. But if you're talking about a guy like James Cook that's already 4 yards downfield and just, broke a linebacker's ankles in space, that's a different type of receiver. And, it's in this hyper pass heavy offense. So I love James Cook and I want to draft him all the time.
Yeah. Evan, you're like 30 spots ahead of ADP on James Cook.
You need to stop this, Evan. This is nonsense. Okay, you're destroying my James Cook plan.
It's irresponsible at this point. But I mean, I don't want to move him any lower though. Because for some of the reasons that you just laid out. He's also, I think that there's this theory that Devin Singletary is going to be the early down back and James Cook is going to be the passing down back. But like, Devin Singletary isn't very big either. I mean, he's not, he's like 5'6" or 5'7", 203. James Cook's 5'11", 200. It's they don't have a bell cow back in their backfield. And why can't James Cook steal some of the early down stuff and still handle pretty much all of the passing down stuff? I mean, in a prolific offense.
For sure.
And let's be honest, they've been trying to replace Singletary. Like it seems like since they drafted him. Yeah. Like and to his credit, like he's managed to hold off the competition, but I don't know how much of that is him versus just the competition hasn't been very good. This is going to be the best backfield mate by far that he's had to compete with.
I want to run through 4 more here as quickly as we can. First, Miles Sanders. Was it a fluke that Miles Sanders scored 0 touchdowns last year, Dwayne? Or do the Eagles, are they intent going forward on turning this into some committee with Gainwell and Boston Scott, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I mean, when you have 0 rushing touchdowns, like obviously like it's some factor, but I mean, he only handled 35% of the short down and distance work. So they don't necessarily care to give him the ball in that role. They let, Jalen Hurts handle that. So I don't know. I don't think that Miles Sanders will suddenly have like this, much larger touchdown upside. Do I think he's going to score touchdowns? Yes. But I don't think they really use him, from a utilization perspective, the way that we would expect a back that we would see, big, positive regression, for rushing touchdowns. So I still think it's a committee. Could he score 4 or 5 touchdowns? Sure. But it's just a situation that like, fine, I'll take him at ADP, but I'm not reaching for Miles Sanders.
Yeah. He's just so cheap. I mean, you can get him in the 70s a lot of the time for Miles Sanders. I want to ask, staying in the NFC East, about the Washington situation. I was excited about Antonio Gibson last year. I know a lot of people were as well. Maybe we overrated him as a prospect. Now they bring in Brian Robinson. J.D. McKissic comes back. Obviously would have been huge for Antonio Gibson. But I don't know. I'm maybe starting to believe that Washington doesn't really think of Antonio Gibson as a pass catcher anyways. What do you think about how Antonio Gibson is used, and can he be kind of a bounce back value this year after he burned many of us last year?
Yeah, I think the talent is still there, but I think the signals, right, are telling us that they're just not going to do it. Like the J.D. McKissic re-signing is the big blow because we know Gibson can be a good, receiver out of the backfield. He mostly played receiver in college. Don't have to rehash all of that. But bringing back McKissic and then now also going to a 3rd round back out of Alabama and Brian Robinson, and they've already openly said he's going to compete for early down work. So to me, it's on. I mean, we're dealing with a 3-way split now and an offense that could be better with Wentz, but still has a lot of questions. Just not a player that, I'm clicking on a lot, even at the discounted ADP.
Okay. Last 2 here are in the NFC West, the Eli Mitchell role. I thought Eli Mitchell, clearly Kyle Shanahan loved Eli Mitchell last year. I was just thought that they would look for a strict pass catching complement to go with Eli Mitchell, but it seems like they're not all too interested in that. What do you think about the way Eli Mitchell will be used this year? Because let's be honest, I mean, he's the unquestioned starter, it seems to me. I know we've talked a lot about PDP and all that, but I think Eli Mitchell has a pretty good stranglehold on this role, at least to start the year. What do you think about him, Dwayne?
Yeah. So with Mitchell, very explosive player, 14% explosive rush rate. So well above the league average, out of 30 backs, at least 150 attempts. So, and I think Kyle Shanahan does like that, right? That's what he's looking for, is that explosive, playmaker. But at the same time, I was listening to y'all's podcast, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago when Evan started talking about Tyrion Davis-Price potentially being the early down lead. Last year they really were looking for, Trey Sermon to take that role. He did a complete face plant, so it just didn't work out. And I got to say, like with Shanahan and how fickle he is, and the 3rd round capital that we have with TDP and Elijah Mitchell only being a 6th round pick last year, like I think it's tough to trust. Now it's pretty well priced into ADP. Like you're getting Elijah Mitchell, and you never have to take Elijah Mitchell at ADP. If you're going to do 10 drafts, you can probably in 5 of them get Elijah Mitchell like 10 spots past ADP. Like it just naturally happens. So you don't have to like reach for him. But I don't know, man. I'm a bit worried. So I mean, I want Evan's thoughts on this one because I moved him down like after listening to that pod. To be honest, I just started thinking about it more. I was like, you know what? He's right. It's freaking Kyle Shanahan. He's going to do this crap to us again.
Yeah, I mean, I think you laid out my thoughts like perfectly. I mean,
I just stole them and repeated them, so that's why.
I mean, and TDP is 225 pounds, and Elijah Mitchell really. I don't know that he was. I mean, of course, he was a 6th round pick out of a smaller school, and he really profiled as like a Raheem Mostert type of player coming out of college, and I think is just everybody around him face planted. Or Jeff Wilson was coming off the injury, and Trey Sermon. I mean, he's awful. So I think that things just kind of like landed in place for Elijah Mitchell. He capitalized. Kyle Shanahan came to trust him. Just everything kind of went his way. And now they added a player who's actually built like a workhorse. So that's my concern, is that could TDP become the lead back and Elijah Mitchell become like the explosive change of pace Raheem Mostert, and and they wind up using multiple backs, because I think it's a bad bet. What did Elijah Mitchell, his rush share last year was something incredible, like over 70% in the San Francisco backfield. That seems like a bad bet for them to try to do that, something like that again.
Yeah, it was 62% last year in the games where he played at least 10% of the snaps.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Elijah Mitchell's ADP on Fantasy Pros right now up at 43.8. Obviously, I think that's too rich for all of us. Evan has him 59th overall right now in his top 150. Last one I wanted to hit on, there was some news this week on the Seattle stuff. My take is that these beat writer speculations on how backfields will go when it's not reporting, it's just speculation, is mostly noise and not news. But a lot of people ran with it that, Rachaad Penny's the unquestioned starter, and Rachaad Penny's going to get 20 carries a game, which you can go back and listen to the Market Monday pod because I went on a whole rant about that. But anyways, we can't deny that Rachaad Penny last year at the end of the year broke fantasy. We also can't deny that he's a 2nd round pick on Kenneth Walker. And we can't deny that this looks like one of the worst teams in the NFL. So there's a lot to unpack with Seattle. What do you think about how it's going to play out between Penny and Walker, Dwayne?
I think it's going to end up being a situation to just avoid because I think you're going to need an injury to one of the 2 players. That's what you're counting on. So, I mean, I think Rachaad Penny, had been going after Kenneth Walker. I don't know if they flipped yet or not. The last few drafts I've been in, Kenneth Walker's still been going earlier. So I have a little bit of Penny just because he was going later. I like Kenneth Walker, though. I mean, was a very, explosive player. Like if you want to go watch someone like run split zone, like the dude is awesome, like downhill, or he can make the one cut back and just like so smooth. Yeah, I know he didn't have the receiving work out of college, but like his 33% missed tackles forced per attempt. I mean, 17% explosive rush rate in college. Like those are way above what we normally see for college backs. And so I know the talent is there, and I think it's good enough that they're just going to challenge each other all season, because Penny, to your point, he did really well. Look, when Penny's been healthy, he's been fine. Like I know it's been rare, but like Penny, when he's healthy, is pretty much, a top 15 running back, in fantasy football. But having Russ Wilson gone, knowing that we've got, stodgy old Pete Carroll, running the show. Like if I think like if Sigmund Bloom were on the show, he'd be kind of like, is he going to be willing to give out a Werther's, to Kenneth Walker out of the candy tray? We don't know. But my guess is it's just going to be a committee, and we could even still see some of these other backs like DJ Dallas involved in the passing game. It's just it's mind numbing on an offense where like look, we don't even know what quarterback is going to start. So I'm pretty much just avoiding it.
Yeah, it could end up being like a 3-man backfield too, because Walker didn't have the receiving profile coming out of Michigan State. Rachaad Penny really doesn't have much of a receiving profile either. And then DJ Dallas could be, the passing down guy. And if they're trailing a lot, like, these guys are going to struggle for double-digit carries on a consistent basis. I mean, if it comes to be a 3-man backfield, also I saw that PFF rated Seattle's offensive line like bottom 2 in football. I mean, how are they going to get first downs? Is really what I mean. Drew Lock is terrible. Geno Smith is like a league average backup. It has disaster.
It's hard to say. Give me the under on a team projected for 4.5 wins, but I'll take the under on Seattle.
All right. We're going to end it there. Appreciate Dwain.
Wow, on a positive note.
On a positive note, we're going to end it there. Appreciate Dwain coming on and sharing the RB knowledge. Dwain, tell the people where they can find you, where they can find your work.
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at Dwain McFarland, DWAIN MCFARLAND. And you can find me over at Pro Football Focus, pretty much doing a pod like every other day with Ian Harditz, and then just putting out content just like you guys, like every day right now through the beginning of the season. So it's go time.
Love it, man. All right. Appreciate everyone for being here for all 4 of the pods we did this week. We'll be back next week with another 3 or 4 pods. We'll see how it turns out. For Evan, for Dwain, for Producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.